The sleepwalking occurs when the unconscious mind takes over the body, but sleepwalking is also a metaphor. Being asleep symbolizes a lack of awareness and attentiveness, and along these lines, consciousness can also be associated with our ability to direct our attention in a purposeful way, to delay our responses rather than give in to knee-jerk reactions, to reflect upon our choices, to deliberate and make thoughtful and responsible decisions. So it's a short step from awareness, this notion of awareness, to ideology and the Marxist notion of consciousness. For traditional Marxists, consciousness translates to a political understanding of the world. The consciousness of the ruling class naturally rationalizes their good fortune and views the subordinate classes as getting exactly what they deserve. This type of consciousness is called a false consciousness. And it's transmitted to the subordinate classes as ideology through institutions such as schools, churches, and the mass media. And in this way, the subordinate classes adopt the false consciousness of the ruling classes. The answer to this problem is to teach them the truth, teach them about the reality of their oppression, and thereby raise their consciousness. And this idea of consciousness raising was also adopted by the feminist movement in their efforts to end gender discrimination. I should also add that over the past half-century, neo-Marxists have abandoned the dichotomy between a false consciousness based on ideology and a true consciousness based on reality. They replaced it with the relativistic notion that all consciousnesses are a function of ideology. It's all false, in the sense that it's all a social construction, and the only thing that matters is whose side you're on. Now, notions of false consciousness and raised consciousness, while broad in certain respects, appear shallow in contrast with Freud's depth psychology, with the consciousness and unconsciousness. Certainly, they're closer to the surface than notions of altered states of consciousness. You may remember Timothy Leary and his followers, and back in the psychedelic 60s, ingesting hallucinogenic substances in order to alter sense perception and thought processes. From that perspective on consciousness, different states carry with them different modes of awareness, so that by experiencing a greater variety of states of consciousness, opening the doors of perception, as it were, we can increase our overall level of awareness. Often this includes moving from a linguistic, intentional mode to a perceptual and extensional one. Again, my purpose here is not to endorse or condemn, only to describe. I should also note that to some extent religion has always been concerned with altered states of consciousness and with generating higher levels of awareness. Art too can be a means of achieving new modes of sense perception and alternate states of consciousness. That was a point that McLuhan was fond of making. And Postman would remind us that teaching is most certainly an effort to shape thought, perception, minds, and modes of consciousness. Education is a consciousness-raising activity, as is, of course, general semantics itself, as we seek to raise awareness of language in simple use. Of course, general semanticists are also known to say, get it into your nervous system, which reflects an underlying biological perspective. Many of these ideas relate consciousness to uniquely human modes of thought and to higher mental processes. And more than a matter of simple awareness, a distinctively human consciousness can be viewed as an awareness of one's own self, an awareness of one's own awareness. We are self-aware, self-conscious, that is, we are conscious of our own consciousness. Awareness of our own consciousness is intimately caught up with awareness of the consciousness of others, with theory of mind, the theory that others have a mind that works more or less like our own. A classic example of theory of mind, an experiment actually, goes like this. I tell you that there are two individuals, let's call them Stuart and Wendell, and they're in a room together. Together, they put a $50 bill into a box and close the box, and then they both leave the room. A little later, Stuart sneaks into the room, removes the 50, closes the box back up, and leaves. Then, a little bit later after that, Wendell comes back into the room. And the question I ask you is, where does Wendell think the $50 bill is? Now, typically, we all say he will think that it's in the box. He didn't see Stewart come in and remove the bill. That is, we assume that Wendell has a mind like our own. We can put ourselves in Wendell's place and understand what things look like from his point of view. We also understand the act of deception committed by Stewart. Individuals who are blind, who can't see and cannot visualize the scene that I've described, can still answer this correctly. Individuals of limited mental capacity also understand the difference between what they know and what Wendell knows. But individuals with autism will answer differently. They will say that Wendell would know that Stewart has the $50 bill, because they cannot distinguish between what they know and what other people know. According to Simon Baron-Cohen, autistic individuals are characterized by mind blindness, his way of referring to the failure to develop theory of mind. They do not see others as having a mind like their own, and they have relatively little or no self-consciousness. Now, does this mean that they do not have a consciousness at all? I have to admit to a certain lack of impartiality on the matter because my daughter is autistic. From what I have observed, she thinks, she plans, she plays, she jokes, she gets angry, sad, and frightened. She loves. She even constructs novel sentences despite a very limited capacity for language. But her self-awareness and her understanding of others has not developed the way it has for typical children. Now, Donna Williams, who's actually a high-functioning autistic, is able to describe what the world looks like to her. I want to read a passage from one of her books. She writes, "Up to the age of 4, I sensed according to pattern and shifts in pattern. My ability to interpret what I saw was impaired because I took each fragment in without understanding its meaning in the context of its surroundings. I'd see the nostril but lose the nose, see the nose but lose the face, see the fingernail but lose the finger. My ability to interpret what I heard was equally impaired. I heard the intonation, but lost the meaning of the words. Got a few of the words, but lost the sentences. I couldn't consistently process the meaning of my own body messages if I was focusing in on something with my eyes or ears. I didn't know myself in relation to other people because when I focused on processing information about other, I lost self. And when I focused on self, I lost other. I could either express something in action or make some meaning of some of the information coming in, but not both at once. So crossing the room to do something meant I'd probably lose the experience of walking, even though my body did it. Speaking, I'd lose the meaning of my own sounds whilst moving. The deaf-blind may have lost their senses. I had my senses, but lost the sense. I was meaning deaf, meaning blind. But what Williams describes can be considered an alternate state of consciousness, one that typical individuals might achieve by artificial means. Altered states of consciousness achieved by meditation or drug use often involve the retrieval of a pre-linguistic state of mind, and in this respect, it's instructive to consider how Temple Grandin describes her condition. Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, a designer of livestock facilities, and probably the best-known autistic individual in the world today. In her own words, she writes, "I think in pictures. Words are like a second language to me. I translate both spoken and written words into full-color movies, complete with sound, which run like a VCR tape in my head. When somebody speaks to me, his words are instantly translated into pictures. Language-based thinkers often find this phenomenon difficult to understand. But in my job as an equipment designer for the livestock industry, visual thinking is a tremendous advantage." So when it comes to intelligences, autistics defy normal categorization, as they may be savants in one or two categories, special categories, and far below average in others. Based in part on this phenomenon, and this is part of what led Howard Gardner to arrive at his theory of multiple intelligences. And I would suggest to you that autism can help us to understand that there are many forms of human consciousness as well. And this multiplicity may account for the many conceptions of consciousness that I have reviewed with you.